Ever-growing family of networks means in addition to staffs on our network as well, and that includes WV Sports Now. So we've added a couple of staff writers to WV Sports Now as part of our coverage of Mountaineer sports, as well as what's going on in West Virginia athletics, but that also means West Virginia football as we're inching close to college football season. And for this show, I'm going to introduce you to those writers. I'm Mike Asti, of course, here, and I'm going to introduce you to those two new members of our staff, as well as we're going to talk some football. We're going to leave conference realignment alone for this show and talk some football, actually what's supposed to be going on the football field, and maybe get them to give some predictions about what they think is going to happen this coming football season. So I will get them on the screen here as well. And that is, of course, Julia Mellett and Karl Ludwig. So guys, how are you? First off, thanks for joining me. Happy to have you on board for our coverage this season. And then Julia, I'll go with you first, I guess. Just briefly tell us about yourselves here, as you're now going to be members of WV Sports Now for the season for sure.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I have covered basically every collegiate sport in the Big 12.
Okay.
I wrote for the WVU newspaper. I covered women's soccer and wrestling for the Daily Athenaeum. And on the broadcast side, I have covered baseball, football, basketball, rifle, swimming and diving, track. I mean, I've covered everything. I've also covered club sports as well. So there is not really a sport that I have not covered in some capacity, but I'm excited to be covering football this season.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. So if you dabbled into everything, it's great to also dabble in football as well, which certainly is the premier sport at WVU. And I also do enjoy that you've done work at the DA and U92. I did that as well when I was in college. So Karl, tell us a little bit about yourself here. Again, Julia Mellett and Karl Ludwig joining us, WV Sports Now. Of course, follow at WV Sports Now on Twitter. Head over to WVSportsNow.com. And of course, bottom of this video, hit up Pittsburgh Sports Live there, clicking the subscribe button. But Karl, where have you been, man? I'm glad to have you aboard.
Yeah,
but give us a quick bio.
Glad to be here. Unlike you guys, I don't have that WVU background, but I'm making the jump from D2 to D1 now.
Okay.
I'm just finishing up school now at Slippery Rock in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Go Rock, of course.
Okay.
So
my mom went there, actually. My mom is a Slippery Rock alum.
There we go. Well, it's a little plug there, but yeah. So we're going from D2 to D1 now. I was the sports editor for the Rocket there for a couple of years.
Awesome.
And I covered about everything. Wasn't as diverse as Julia with the rifle and all that, but I mean, not as big as school, so not many options there. But I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to make the jump to Mountaineer football. Very excited. Okay.
So I imagine you had some connection with Cody then, Cody Nesper, who was previously with us at WV Sports. Now he's moved on.
I just missed him on the staff, but I came in after him and I took his role eventually on staff.
Okay. Well, that's interesting then. You took his role initially there at Slippery Rock, and you're kind of replacing him a little bit now. And tip of the cap to Cody as well, by the way, because we are needing several to replace his production over there at WV Sports Now. So again, WV Sports Now for all your Mountaineer football coverage, but we do cover beyond just football. So Julia certainly can bring some of those skills and some of that resume to us on the network as well. And we are now looking at a new season, year 3 for Neil Brown. Talked to some colleagues around West Virginia athletics, around different media outlets that cover the Mountaineers pretty exclusively. Had Brad Howe actually here with Metro News. I do some work with them as well on my show before last season. And he touched on how everyone kind of called it year 0 when Brown first got hired, which just saying that alone was tremendous because, as you know, college football coaches don't get tons of rope. So to have the athletic department and Shane Lyons in particular being able to call something year 0, realizing that there was a lot needing to be built and the cupboard was kind of bare at that point, and the Dana Holgerson, no matter what you think of it, was over, and it was a new era for Neil Brown. But then last year rolls around, does get the Mountaineers in a bowl game. So this now a big season for Neil Brown because you step up from year 0, get your team into a bowl game, you're rebuilding things, you're getting your recruiting class, top 20 recruiting class in the country, kind of surprising how well they've done recruiting-wise this offseason. But that's for the future. We're going to talk now the here and now in this coming up 2021 season that we are very, very close to. what are your thoughts on this team this year, Karl? And what does this team need to do to have what Neil Brown said at the end of last season? He guarantees he's going to bring them back to glory. He guarantees they're going to be progressing, and the literal trust the climb mantra to be continuing a successful road, because obviously if they're not in a bowl game this coming season after being in one last year, that would be going backwards. What do you think is going to occur in terms of your expectations, and then what would need to occur for a reasonable step up?
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously pieces are in place right now. They had a good team last year. The defense was phenomenal. Offense couldn't quite pick up the slack at times. Obviously, Jarrett Doege's a big piece here.
Yeah.
Luddy Brown's the most talented player on the offense now, but if Jarrett Doege can take a step forward, the offense could be much, much improved from last year, and that'd be huge for a defense that loses some big names in the secondary and on the line, across the board really. So, Doege's continued improvement, which we've been hearing about going well so far, would be astronomical for that offense. I think it would lead to another winning season, another bowl game with a win potentially at the end of the season.
Yeah. Would you be concerned, though, in terms of the trust to climb? Because it's years in the making, and he does have the trust of Shane Lyons. They are in lockstep. It's not going to just be a 1 or 2 year type of thing to get them back where they want to be and where the program once was. But does it have to be for you for this climb to continue to be trusted? They are at least solidifying a bowl game appearance going into the last few weeks of the season rather than down the stretch like last year and squeaking in a great game against Army, but not necessarily the best bowl game out there. Do they need to appear in a better bowl game? Do they need to jump up and be a conference contender? Because obviously that would be a major jump up, but there is an argument to be said that separate from conference realignment and the whole asininity of that, this might be a year where the door is open, because Oklahoma is always going to be a beast. Texas claims they're back, but we've yet to see it. And beyond that, there are a lot of programs in flux that were good last year and haven't tasted it consistently, like Iowa State, etc. There might be a door open for the Mountaineers if things go right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think they're picked 6 to finish preseason Big 12. I'd be confident in saying they'll finish 3 or 4. Then, okay. I mean, Oklahoma's 1. Iowa State's very good, and then Texas, you got Texas, you got West Virginia, and you got TCU are all right there in the mix. Oklahoma State as well. So if Doege can take those steps forward, the defense can kind of reload a bit.
Yeah,
they could be a team that can challenge, and they can play any team in this conference close. They got a big test week 4 against Oklahoma. that could be a real looking glass kind of game as to how the season might go.
Yeah, kind of early in the season too, because in past years that's been at the end. It's been jammed at the end, and it could either ruin a year or it could bring you into being happy about the end of that season closing. But yeah, earlier in the season, but it also could kind of maybe diminish your hopes early on. So I guess it's positive or negative no matter how you slice it there. Again, Karl
Ludwig. Win the game, it's a huge momentum boost. Lose the game, it's like, all right, Mountaineers all over again.
Yeah, but of course, again,
it's also Oklahoma.
Let's face it. Yeah. I'm not going to do. I wouldn't advise anyone to put any money down on WU beating Oklahoma, and I'm not going to be doing. I'm not going to be doing so either. Yeah, right. So again, it's early in the season, earlier in the season, but it doesn't have to ruin things with it being so early. And you're going to kind of gauge yourself on almost everybody else, and maybe a year or so from now, we'll see. We'll see when Oklahoma's even still in the conference, because obviously that's a whole other conversation for another day. Julia, kind of segue from what Karl was saying there about Jarrett Doege, because honestly, let's face it, that's the key to the season. Will Jarrett Doege progress? He is a veteran quarterback that now can't say he's learning or inexperienced or hasn't done it before or needs to learn this offense. This is another year under Neil Brown's system. This is it for him in college. He's known Neil Brown since he was literally 12 years old. They're catering to Jarrett Doege. He certainly showed flashes last year. I honestly think Mountaineer fans were a little bit harder on him than they should have been entering the season, and maybe the expectations for him were a little ridiculous. But he also had that game back home in Texas Tech where he absolutely didn't get it done. He's had other moments where he didn't get it done and kind of ruined some games. Does need to take a step up and progress this year for this team to be better than what they are predicted and to even jump in the top 3 or 4, let alone legitimizing a chance to contend for the conference championship game. So do you expect Jarrett Doege to progress? And is that true for you that this season really, no matter what else we discuss, hinges on if Jarrett Doege does take a step up or not?
I really think that the communication between Daggy and his receiving core is going to be absolutely crucial. And I think that we interviewed Bryce Ford Wheaton about a week ago, and he just casually dropped the fact that they had thrown 110,000 balls in the offseason. And there was a collective in the media room. There was a collective just like, what? Because those are historically kind of SEC numbers. And so having a team like WVU in the Big 12 already throwing those numbers in the offseason. Right. And on top of that, we were kind of joking with Daggy in a different interview about the fact that they now have a quarterback throwing machine. So they can just hit the wide receivers constantly. Right. And Daggy doesn't really need to be that specific because it would tire his arm out to be throwing 110,000 balls. But having that machine is really helpful in the offseason and going into the season for the wide receivers.
Yeah, facility-wise, West Virginia has certainly stepped the game up, which again goes into the whole other conversation, which I've discussed throughout this channel and on the network about the future of the program in the Big 12 or not, or what they should do, etc. Certainly there's a major conference vibe there based on what they've done program-wise. But again, this does go to Daggy, and it does go to the relationship with those receivers. For Wheaton would certainly be that guy in particular. And it almost makes you think, too, of that's kind of off-season work in a Dana Holgorsen offense. Not as much Neil Brown. I mean, that's kind of what Dana Holgorsen kind of wanted to bring and kind of put together a little bit with Will Grier. That's not as maybe what you would have expected out of Jared Daggy, or even last year when the team clearly relied so much on Lady Brown on the ground. No matter what you needed from Daggy, this team went as far as Brown would take them, which certainly is not the way the NFL usually works. Certainly a quarterback league for college football, it can certainly be driven by a running back. Do you guys expect it to still be driven that way, or do you expect this offense to maybe be opened up a little bit if they see chemistry from receivers? Because, again, there's going to be more chemistry and more experience between quarterback and receiver. You don't want to kill the running back. You still may drive it through him, but maybe a more diverse offense, maybe even using the backs as receivers, maybe getting more of a passing offense. Do you expect a little different offense for the Mountaineers, success or not, certainly early in a season to try it out in comparison to last year?
I mean, I think that having Letty Brown be a mainstay for the offense is going to be huge because he is primed to have another 1,000-plus yard season.
You would assume, yeah.
And I think that in addition to what the wide receivers have already voiced in terms of their chemistry with Daggy, I think that is really going to set us up for some good down the field yardage.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karl, what does Daggy need to work on for you? You've seen him for a while now. You've seen his game. Julia's talking about what he's been working on in the offseason. Is it maybe more accuracy, pushing the ball down the field, outside just chemistry with the wide receivers? Anything that you're going to be looking for earlier in the season that you want to see from him? Because I don't know if we're ever going to see a 400-yard passing game every single week from Jared Daggy, nor should anyone be expecting that. But it was a bit of a roller coaster ride at times. And when you mix in that Texas Tech game with what else you saw, it makes you wonder. I mean, in the Texas Tech game, he looked like a backup quarterback. But in other games, he looked like he certainly is good enough to lead this team.
Yeah, no, I mean, Julia mentioned the communication with the receivers, which is huge. Because, I mean, while he was up and down at times, the receivers also didn't have the most sure hands last season.
Sure.
And that doesn't help with the chemistry going forward or last season, and then momentum building during games. So if they can cut out the drops a bit and he can just make the plays that he's supposed to make, the offense will already be improved. I mean, they have to do something to kind of spell Eddie Brown. I mean, he was a workhorse. He played a major role in the offense, and he should do so this year as well. But they have to find ways to complement him and give him a break when he needs it. It can't be all pound the ball, Letty Brown. They have to find a way to.
Especially, he's not catching anyone off guard anymore. Like at the beginning of last season, I don't think fans were as aware of him entering last season, or even opponents as aware of him entering last season as everybody is now. So
yeah, he's very well known now.
Yeah, you're not catching anybody off guard by any means. You cannot just be told him the rock and let him take you to the promised land and everybody just get on his back. That certainly will probably be a problem, be a very one-dimensional offense. West Virginia is going to be needing to be more of a diversified offense.
And he should give Daggy more looks in the air. I mean, if Daggy can get those play-action passes or anything to open up the pass game with deep shots in the field, it will help himself out, but also Lady Brown as well, and the whole offense should be more balanced if that can happen.
You would assume, and certainly that's the plan, I'd imagine, for Neil Brown, to say the least. Karl, Ludwig, and Julia Mellett, the newest members, among the newest members of our staff at WV Sports now, amongst our family of networks here. And, of course, head over to WV Sports Now, and, of course, subscribe here to Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm going to be doing post-game shows after these Mountaineer games. You're going to be hearing more and seeing more from these two on those shows. Guys, flipping over to the other side of the football, though, because, Karl, you mentioned this at the top of the program. Obviously, Jared Daggy's progression is a key here. If he does not step up and he goes backwards, then the season's not going to go anywhere. If he does progress, though, and Lady Brown gives you what you expect and you get more from the receivers and they help out Daggy more and the offensive line does enough, because that's a big deal too, then it's going to hinge over to the defensive side of the football, which is weird for that to be a question, because last year, some may forget, and it's kind of been underrated, they were the best defense in the country the first few weeks of the season, and that was after dealing with such a scandal in the offseason that they didn't even know who was going to be their coach weeks prior to kicking off. So this year, there's more continuity. You're not dealing with a scandal. You're just going to work. And that should be a benefit for this defense that still played decent last year, but they also had their moments where that kind of got puttered away, and they maybe weren't the best that they could be at times in games either. Darius Still's gone. Julia mentioned that in terms of a star being gone. He's now gone. Dante talking about, we have a video here in Pittsburgh Sports Live. We had coverage there on the site about what it is like now not having his brother there and what it will be like playing without his brother, who is in the NFL with the Raiders. What are your thoughts on the defensive side of the football? What are the strengths going to be? What are the weaknesses going to be? And how much of a loss is Darius Stills not being there? It sounds like an obvious answer. It's going to be a big loss. He is an NFL player, wasn't drafted, but still in the National Football League. But can Dante step up? Can they fill the gaps in other ways? And thoughts on the rest of the defense?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there were some big losses on defense. I mean, losing guys like Stills, guys like Tony Fields. I mean, losing guys like Tyke Smith and Dre Sean on the secondary, it's going to hurt. I mean, there's no way to kind of trade cut that. It's going to hurt. But there is still plenty of talent on that defense, and they should be a top one in the Big 12. I mean, when you have guys like Nakeem Mezzo or like Dante, who's still there for his senior season, when you have guys like Josh Chandler Semeno, you have guys like all the front seven should be a very talented group still. The questions come in the secondary where you get to replace guys like Tyke Smith and Dre Sean. I mean, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough to replace them. But if they can do that and kind of stop the chunk plays in the air, the front seven should be strong enough to kind of stop the run game from opposing teams.
Julia,
they're coming in. Mesidor was a true freshman All-American.
Yeah.
So he's you kind of know what you're getting with him. But I was talking to Stills the other day about the communication that has to happen, because it's kind of the Stills brothers, and then you suddenly lose one of them, and you have to have communication now that was so easy.
Right.
When they were brothers.
And how can you better communicate than someone that you share a bloodline with? That's not going to be the case with anybody out there on the field. So.
Right. But Stills now has to work with Mesidor. So watching that communication process continue is going to be very interesting. And I think that having a true freshman All-American to fall back on and work through those things with is certainly nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah, and last year, obviously, they were powerful against the run. You'd imagine that's still going to be a strength of this team. The secondary seemingly is almost always a weakness of this team. That probably will be the case again. But as Karl alluded to, we're talking still Big 12 football here. So to be the best team and to be the best defensive unit in the Big 12, I don't know if that's necessarily saying much. You probably can get that done without being great defense overall in college football. but it can certainly help you win games in conference play. And doing a lot of those post-game shows last year and even preview shows talking with opposing media, many of them said this is the toughest defense they're playing all year. And that was not a Mountaineer team that was dominating anybody by any means, getting in a bowl game, but not certainly a team that was running, roughshod over the league. So the defense certainly was a strength. We'll see whether it's a strength or not, but maybe it'll be more of an overall balanced team as we're talking about offense and defense. Maybe this is an opportunity now for Dante to step up because you're talking about their relationship and not having his brother there. Honestly, this is a great opportunity for him, and I could have went into the draft last year, chose to come back. It's hard to leave money out there, but I do think it was a positive for him in the future because this is – if he ever was going to have a chance to showcase himself away from his brother's shadow, this is the opportunity. Because it was always going to be the Stills brothers with Darius's name first. In every headline, his name would be first. He'd be talked to first. You're interviewing him first. If they're both out there in a media session, people are running away from him to go talk to his brother. That's not going to happen this year. So this is definitely an opportunity for him maybe to step up because they do need leadership on that defensive line, but certainly the secondary, a major question. Karl, Ludwig, Julia Mellett here of WV Sports Now, joining me to talk some Mountaineer football as we're close to the season, introducing them to you and also our coverage here at WV Sports Now. It's college football season in the air, so that's a positive. I'm happy about that no matter what's been going on in the past few weeks and how maybe annoying those conversations have been. Guys, as we wrap things up, and we're going to have more of them throughout the season, of course, I do want to get some predictions here. I've seen a lot of predictions out there from our colleagues on social media and other platforms and just conversations. What record do you see this team achieving this year? What are your – and are there any other bowl predictions? What are your thoughts on the record and any bowl predictions offered in terms of an individual player? Or do you see a big upset victory? Do you see them beating Oklahoma finally? Or on the flip side, because I've seen some of this, obviously a lot of people are saying 8-4, 9-3, 7-5, etc. But I'm seeing if people go to games, I'm seeing a loss to Baylor. I'm seeing some losses to non-ranked teams that I think Mountaineer fans would probably look at those years and say, it's a step up. I'm trusting the climb. But that's kind of what was happening before where you're still laying an egg in games and losing teams you should beat. So thoughts on your prediction for the Mountaineers record this coming up season, and then any bowl predictions on games or players and what you think may go down.
I'm gonna say 8-4, 5-4 in conference. Okay. I say we lose to Oklahoma, TCU, Iowa State, and Texas.
Okay.
And I think that coming off of last season, I think that the TCU win from 2020 will turn into a loss. But that could change because WVU will be coming off a bye. So right. That may be an interesting game to watch in terms of how it may or may not flip. But I really do think that we can go 3-0 into Oklahoma.
Although, granted, Maryland, Virginia Tech in there, that's not really murderer's row going into Oklahoma. I think the expectations are they should be 3-0 going into Oklahoma, of course. Virginia Tech bringing that rivalry back there September 18th, a noon game for out-of-conference play. This also is, and Karl, we talked about this earlier in the show, that maybe this is a conference that's kind of ripe for the taking. There might be a door open to be better than top 6, maybe to be 3 or 4, or even legitimately contend towards the end of the year because outside of Oklahoma, no one's really a world beater and predicted to be in the current playoff format. They're entering the season at number 2. Going into this year, we don't know how things are going to shake out, and certainly there are some good teams out there, but it's also not a brutal out-of-conference schedule. I mean, in past years, we're talking about Alabama and those type of teams out of conference, even Tennessee and the SEC. You're not seeing that this year. Virginia Tech is an average program. This isn't Michael Vick's Virginia Tech team. And, of course, outside of that out-of-conference play, Maryland, similar situation, then you're seeing a team below your level mixed in there. But what are your thoughts, Karl, on your thoughts on their record? Julia says 8-4. What do you think is going to happen in terms of a record? And then do you see any big wins or bad losses mixed in? TCU probably, I feel like, would be thought of as a bad loss, even if that's what you get that record be, even coming off a bye. And then Baylor is the game before that bye, which I'm seeing many are picking as a loss for WVU.
Yeah, I could say I'm going to go with 8-4 as well. I think it's a prime. Okay. It's more jumping up. They're going to go 5-7, right. 6-4, 8-4 now. I do agree with Reno entering Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Gonna go a loss there. I mean, it's Oklahoma.
Right.
Oklahoma. That's not no shame in that. That's fine.
I'll ask you this then for both of you. before you go on, will they be competitive in that game? Will you leave that game thinking this is a team that can be top 4 in this conference, or you leave that game thinking they're far from Oklahoma still, and this is a 20-point loss?
If they can keep within 14 points, I'll be like, okay, this is.
I guess what has to happen for you to think this is a step up? Are you trusting a climb?
Improvement. They have to show that they're actually like playing. I mean, if it's a 4-touchdown game entering the fourth and they come back and score twice in the fourth, and it's like, okay, whatever. It's not.
Right.
Not, but if they're fighting, if they're clawing, if they go down by 2 scores and come back and they're fighting it back for that game, yeah, that's a huge win. I mean, Oklahoma is a superior team. That's not
right.
arguable.
Right. Yeah.
If they can compete, I mean, that's a huge win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that it's going to be not a close game, but a competitive game.
Okay.
And I think that delineation needs to be.
That's the word I used. That was in the question. That's the word I used. I think to be a competitive game, though, it would have to kind of be like Karl was saying. It can't be a game that you don't watch. You see the box score, they lose by 14. Okay, that could be garbage touchdown. That could be garbage touchdown. That could be garbage points. And Oklahoma is not going to play up because of their defense necessarily. So if they have a 4-touchdown lead, they go into late in the game, they could easily kind of turn it off defensively and then allow some points for the Mountaineers, but it won't be like they were ever worrying about losing the game. We'll see the competitive.
One of the things that I'm worried about is Mountaineer fans, because say we do go into Oklahoma 3-0, they're going to be excited for conference play, and then we're going to hand them an L, and they'll fall off.
No, 100% that could occur, but you have to look at the schedule. I mean, we're talking about Maryland, CW Post, and Virginia Tech going into Oklahoma. I would say on the flip side, guys, to play devil's advocate here, if they don't start 3-0, then I don't know if the climb is progressing where it should be. Virginia Tech is a team that's fighting for bowl games. They're in bowl games, but they're certainly equal to where the Mountaineers are coming into this year. And maybe that could be the only one that you could say, okay, maybe they're not taking a step above. Maybe they're in the same situation. Okay, if you lose that game. They can't be losing to Maryland. They certainly can't be. They got to dominate CW Post. I mean, that has to be a pretty significant victory by at least 2 touchdowns at minimum. And if they don't do any of that, then they're going to just get slapped around by the Sooners, I'd imagine. And then if they have 2 losses after the Oklahoma week, then – Karl, that's probably why they were put in the number 6 spot.
Yeah. I mean,
that would then be in that neighborhood where you might be able to upset some other teams, but you're probably then looking at 6. The top 4 is gone if you go with multiple losses beyond Oklahoma, because those games certainly are not going to be easy. What are your thoughts the rest of the season, though? Obviously, I mean, they lose to Oklahoma. If they win, it's obviously incredible, but everyone's feeling like they're going to lose that game, feeling like they should win prior to that game. So obviously about beyond that, Julia has 8-4. You had 8-4. Anything beyond that game, though, that jumps out? Like Julia had them losing to TCU. Iowa State, that's a top 10 team in the country. Obviously, that was a special season for the Cyclones last year. Can they duplicate that? That's going to be more of a veteran team. Texas, again, as I mentioned. They're a team, unlike Oklahoma, the Mountaineers have a great history in the Big 12 of being able to be competitive and beat and have big moments.
Playing at home,
too. Hate the Mountaineers because of what they've done, right? Horns down and all of that. I'll do it here on the broadcast and get us fined here on the show. But they're a top 25 team. They're not back to what they keep proclaiming, but they should be better than WVU, you would assume.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not. That's the prediction, at least.
Talent-wise, yes, but I like their odds of beating Texas at home.
Okay.
If everything goes well and they're 3-0, entering Oklahoma, close game there. They have Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU after that. They should win 2 of those 3 games, if not all 3 of them. And that's setting up well for probably a loss to Iowa State. That'll be a very close game, probably very tough game. Right. Oklahoma State at home will be a better game, and then they have Kansas State, Texas, Kansas. So if they can be a nice 5-2, 6-1 entering that stretch of play with Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Texas, Kansas, that could be a good finish this season. They should win at least 2 of those 5 games there.
Especially coming off of the loss to Oklahoma State last season. I think that game is always incredibly competitive and down to the wire, historically, the last few seasons. So I think that is also one to watch in terms of WVU production later in the season.
Yeah, it should be a shootout too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the game that I think people forget because there's so much focus on Oklahoma ruining the year a few years ago where they had a chance for the conference title game. It really was losing Oklahoma State. That was not a great Oklahoma State team. That was a 5-loss Oklahoma State team. If you beat Oklahoma State, the game against Oklahoma, who nobody can beat really in conference play, wouldn't have meant as much. So you're not expecting to beat Oklahoma. And yeah, Kansas State occasionally beats Oklahoma, and other teams occasionally beat Oklahoma. It's not the Mountaineers, so you're not going to expect it from a WVU perspective. I'm going to hate to make this boring here, guys. I'm going to probably go 8-4 as well. I feel like 8-4 is being reasonable. I think anything above 8-4 is progressing beyond what it should be. If you're going to legitimately say year one was year 0 and then last year's a bowl game, I think this year has to be a legitimate bowl game that's not going into the last week of the season where they're squeaking in to try to get a bowl game. That can't occur. I do think it has to step above waiting for an opponent the last game and having it be that type of game. You want to get closer to New Year's in when these games are played and have it be a little better of a bowl game, even if you're not getting into New Year's Day or certainly not into the playoff, obviously, or into the conference title game. You want to have it be a better bowl game and everybody knows kind of what those are. So I think 8-4 can make sense. Anything above that's gravy. You want to have a better bowl game. You want to have that solidified earlier. I hate to go to, agreeing with the masses here, but I do think Baylor is a concern just a little bit because that kind of game is a game that screams like they maybe could lay an egg after maybe be competitive with Oklahoma, maybe beating Texas Tech, getting revenge there, and then maybe eventually that egg gets laid. The first few games, though, should be wins for West Virginia. You go in, they're probably going to get beat down by Oklahoma. Probably I have a win against Texas Tech, but Iowa State, that's probably a loss. Maybe Texas finally catches up on them. They should beat Oklahoma State. Kansas State, they seemingly have trouble with. 8-4. They're just going to find those losses in that schedule. Anything better, of course, would be a bonus. Anything beyond that, though, in terms of 5 losses, 6 losses, that would then – and Neil Brown's not having his job in jeopardy by any means, but giving him tons of rope. But that would certainly put it in a situation where you might need a new slogan. Are you trusting the climb? What's the climb? Is the climb a little bit more of a climb than it should have been? You get in a bowl game last year. You win it. You got to progress and move on. I'm going to close this up, though, guys, with this question. And it's a standard question, but it certainly can lead into the season now. If things go well for West Virginia and they progress and they continue to climb for whatever you think is going to occur, then what did occur? What went on? Did Jaredegi have an all-pro style season? Did Brown carry them through? Did the defense step up and once again be the best defense in the Big 12 Conference? What occurred? And then if this season doesn't climb in the positive direction and they plummet or they have the wheels fall off a little bit, then what occurred? Julia.
I honestly think that it's going to come down to the cornerbacks, because we have receivers who are basically every interview period lauding the work that the cornerbacks have been doing. And I think that, Nick Troy Fortune, I wrote an article about him pretty early on once I was hired here, and he seems like the receivers are just dreading going up against him. And so I think that there are also a couple new cornerbacks that are in the mix. And then the linebackers as well. There are a couple, there's some shifting going on in the linebacker room. So I think that the secondary is going to kind of be switched around a little bit. And a lot of what the position coaches have been talking about is versatility.
Right.
So no player has a specific position necessarily. It's all just cross-training. And for as awesome as an idea as that is in theory, it's going to be interesting how that plays out once the season gets started, because I'm not sure how well-defined everyone's roles will be going into that Maryland game.
Yeah, and you're talking about communication being such a big key. That certainly can cause a lack of communication.
Right.
So that can go the other direction. Karl, if the season goes well, what do you think occurs? And then what does this hinge on if the season doesn't go well? Is it just really the quarterback play again? That's certainly a key.
I hate to make it boring, but it really is about Jaredegi. I talked to his trainer this offseason, Tony Rasiopi. His takeaway was that Degi is a bigger, stronger version of himself than last year. His velocity is up, his strength is up, his accuracy and timing is all up. The communication, like Julia said, is a huge factor for him right now. He should be from what we've all heard, a much improved player. If he can be double or even like half his production from last season, it should be a pretty good team. Because the defense they could have won enough games last year, but the offense couldn't finish in the end zone.
Right.
Not even close to enough. So if they can be a good offense, if he can take that step forward, 8-4, 9-3 should be a pretty easy target goal for him.
Yeah, and as much as I'm saying 8-4, because it kind of makes sense. You look at the schedule. It probably should be more. It probably should be 9-3. I mean, it's not like there are games here that you're going into the game saying they're definitely going to lose outside of Oklahoma. That's probably the only game.
It's a very favorable schedule this year. They have chances to really rise up the rankings here.
Yeah, it's a favorable schedule. It's a favorable conference situation outside of the top. It is a veteran team. There's chemistry there. There's more continuity there from players and coaches this year than before. And certainly this all includes the future of the program. It's trust the climb for now, but also for the future with Neo Brown putting that recruiting class in play that we're not going to see really that come to fruition right now, but certainly to the future of this program. Guys, had some fun. Thanks for joining me on the show. We'll definitely have you back on these post-game shows throughout the year and when any news drops. And you certainly can hit them up on Twitter and also at WV Sports Now for their coverage during this Mountaineer season. So Julia, Mellett, Karl, Ludwig, guys, I definitely appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon, to say the very least. Of course, all you guys out there, follow us at WV Sports Now. Find us at WVSportsNow.com and click that subscribe button bottom of this video to help us get all of our content to you. It is free to do so thanks to our sponsors, and you'll get notification whenever this show's uploaded, any of our shows go live, or anything else is uploaded here on the channel. Again, Julia, Karl, for all of us at PSL, PSN, and beyond, keep it here. Our coverage is over there at WV Sports Now. It's going to be an interesting season, to say the very, very least, as it always seemingly is.